There we go. Okay, awesome.
Sweet.
Hey, everybody. I'm Camilla, and I'm representing She Jumps. I'm the regional coordinator for Western North Carolina, well, for North Carolina. And I'm so excited for all of you to be participating to learn pacing and body positioning techniques with Liz today. You know, I don't, some of you love She Jumps, some of you don't know so much about She Jumps. I just want to give you a brief history of when I joined 3 years ago. What really spoke to me, a friend of mine who is a follower of She Jumps introduced me to the organization. And one of their founding statements is, you know, we believe growth is in our nature, but fear of stereotypes, failure, rejection, labels, etc., those spoken over us, what we've said to ourselves and what we've believed limit our growth. So our vision is to see a world without fear, where people everywhere are living to their potential. And that just speaks to me because, you know, getting into various sports outdoors is intimidating. And there's lots of levels of fear that come with that. And She Jumps encompasses a very inclusive community and really strives to bring events to different communities that are low cost to free, to encourage other girls and women to try something they've wanted to try but haven't had, you know, the motivation, or confidence, you know. And so that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. And Liz, oh, you're in for a treat. So Liz is a doctor of physical therapy. She's an endurance and strength coach, and she's a mountain biker. And she is here to teach us some skills that'll help us put more power to the muscles that need to climb those hills better, stronger, easier, with more energy at the end of it. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us. All yours.
I'm stoked to be here. So kind of give you a little wrap up or a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be going over. First, I'm going to talk about some pacing. I'm going to be talking about how that relates to, I know that Amanda mentioned some traction, some control, and Julia wanted to know about pacing as well. We're going to be talking a lot about that because it's huge. It's huge if you don't have the fitness level that you want to have, but you still want to go out there and ride the trails. It's kind of how you make the most of what you got. And I've been there before because I've had some health issues. And so, yes, I'm a strength and endurance coach and I know a lot about these things, but y'all, things happen that we can't always control. And sometimes our fitness level goes down and sometimes we're starting back from an almost scratch. And so being able to enjoy the trails out there and how we can enjoy them the most is something that's near and dear to my heart for that. And so as we're going through this, we're going to be changing from the pacing into what your body position needs to look like to be able to do the pacing, because we need traction. We need to be able to control our body, and we also need to be able to move efficiently within that. At the end, we're kind of going to do a wrap up. I'll do some Q&A there, but if you have questions that are kind of as we go, pop them in the chat box. I may be able to answer them right then, or I may say like, let's hold on to the very end and I'll snag them then if they're a little bit more beefy or kind of an aside that we're going to talk about through it. That sound good, everybody? Can I just get like a yeah from in the chat? I'm going to be kind of interactive with it. This is not necessarily like I'm just going to be talking to you. It's you're going to be with me in this journey through as we go. So just give me a yeah, sounds great. Or if you're excited about all of that, be fantastic for me. Sweet, I love it. Getting a lot of them. So pacing, what is pacing? Why is it important for us? And what does it do for us? So as we go out, we have kind of think like your battery is your energy level. As we go out, we have this 100% battery level if we're at the top of our game for that day. And there's a lot of things that make our energy level go up and down, like stress, hormones, at what time are we in our cycle? Are we going through perimenopause? Are we in menopause? Do we have stress? How do we sleep? What's our nutrition? What's our hydration? All of those things go into our battery level. So know that battery level can shift and change. That's actually what part of my podcast is this week that I'm releasing. is to talk about that. But so know that your battery level can change, but we're going to pretend it's at 100% for this. Pacing is what lets you maintain more of that battery level for longer. We're going to make you a slow release battery. And so the idea is that we're not going to zap all your energy at once. I'm not going to tell you to go out for a sprint in the first 50 meters that you're going to go out there, because you'd probably look at me like I was crazy, for one. And then two, you'd be like, well, Liz, I want to go for miles, not just like a short section of trail. And so that's what you have to think about. When you're climbing, we're sustaining. We are making our battery go longer. Now, as we think about that battery going longer, we are going to go slower. And so as you think about those two things, one thing you have to get out of the way is it's okay to go slower. It's okay. It's perfectly fine. And after this pacing talk, you'll probably realize why it's actually better for you. And you have an excuse if you ever need to tell anybody about it. So what we do with pacing, one is that we think about how we do heart rate training. And most of y'all, or I'm just going to assume that most of y'all don't know much about heart rate training or endurance training, because I'm going to speak to all y'all at one level, at that base level. And as we think about that, we have different zones that our heart can go into. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and some 5A, 5B type gig. And so 5 is like sprint. You are full on going hard charging. 1 is like super easy. You can talk the entire time. You hardly know that you're actually like doing anything. Zone 2 is that you have a good conversational pace. 3 is, you know, that you're starting to do a little bit, but you can still talk pretty good and have a conversation. You need a little bit more air to breathe. Zone 4 is where you want to talk in like 2-word sentences. So you're like, stop talking to me like I'm breathing here. Y'all, that's where you get into that zone 4. So between zone 3 and zone 4 is what we call sweet spot. That's where a lot of people talk about training. They do a lot of longer intervals there. That's where you have the most output, where you don't have as much recovery as you have to do afterwards. That sweet spot is what it is. It's called a sweet spot for a reason. As we get into that zone 4, that's called our threshold. And then the next one above it is our VO2 max. Those two that are in there is when we use a whole lot more energy. Our battery level starts decreasing a lot in that level. And I know many of y'all thinking, man, I get into that hard breathing, that threshold or that sprint pretty commonly on my rides. There's no way I could not get into it. And that's exactly right. Because how many of y'all are doing, like, think that you are in that threshold, that zone 4 or zone 5 a whole lot in your climbs? I know that I have been. Yep, Miller, raise your hand. Like, it's hard to not be in that. The key part is that anytime you are training to increase your endurance, anytime you are training to increase your cardiac output, that you are stressing your endurance, people don't stay in the threshold, people don't stay in the sprint for long periods of time. So why are you? AKA, they do intervals into them. So they push and then they back off and they recover. And then they push and they back off and they recover a bit. And so as you're stopping or as you're taking breaks, riding excessively, the slowest you could possibly ride on the trail and still have forward momentum at like a snail's pace, that is recovering. That's cardiac training. Does that make sense? Is that registering in your brain a different way of thinking about this? And so as you're pushing into that threshold, as you're pushing into that zone 4 and 5, think, I don't need to stay here for long. Otherwise, my battery's going to be shot. I'm not going to be able to recover and gain a little bit of my battery back. I'm going to get all the way down to here, and then I'm going to sit on the side of the trail, put my head in my hands, and think that I'm dizzy and my heart rate's going crazy and I can't climb. Well, you stopped a little bit before that, before you got to that like full red zone of like, oh my gosh, my body is just failing me. You'd actually be doing yourself a favor and you'd be training your body versus stressing it. Is that change and like flip a coin in some of y'all's brains? Does it change where you would want to stop to take that break? Does it change how you're going to look at some of those easier flat bits in between the little punchy bits, or like the little water bars? Because a lot of times we'll have a punchy climb and then a little water bar, and then a punchy climb and then a little water bar. Instead of getting over that water bar and trying to like gain as much speed as you possibly can for the next little punchy bit, I want you to go as slow as you physically possibly can. Slow with those pedals. And so that's where you can breathe. You can let your heart rate come down some. Or if you need to, you can put a foot down and rest and let your heart rate come down then. Then you can step back onto the bike. Maybe it took like 5 to 10 seconds then. Get back on your bike, you start rolling again, you hit that next bit, pick the next section that you're gonna do, have a stopping point again. Think about it like threshold intervals, zone 4 intervals. No major athlete trains in threshold intervals for long periods of time. It's just not, it's not beneficial. And so as we're looking at wanting to increase our riding potential, wanting to help our endurance, we can ride like we are. We can make it a successful training ride, even though we're just going to go out for a ride. Is anybody's mind blown by that? Whenever I first kind of put those together, I was like, oh, this is how I'm going to be flipping that coin over and helping myself actually gain better endurance on it. Candy asked, would it not quite sure how long that climb is or how long it's going to last. Tips to read the climb. One, it's understanding your trail that you're going to do. And then just, even if you stop and you only have a little bit left in the climb, you're still stopping it when you need to. And so I don't care if there's just like another little bit. If you do that next little bit and that's another like 30 to 45 seconds, and you've already been in your threshold level for 60 seconds, you probably will benefit to stop, to take a rest break, or to go as slow as possible. So then there's the other like coin flip of, okay, I'm just going to do my entire climb slow. I'm just going to ride it as slow as possible. So story, a little bit of backstory on me. I'm pregnant. I am 25 weeks pregnant today. I had an appendectomy at 12 weeks, which is not something that you want to have done while you're pregnant, for one. And it's not really good for going on a Colorado trip in 6 weeks after that. Where I live at like 2,000 feet of elevation, and I'm going to be riding at like 9,000 feet of elevation. And so it's a huge difference within that. So one of the things that I really did for my pacing whenever I was out in Colorado was I did every climb really excessively slow. And I would tell myself while I was climbing, because I did the Monarch Crest kind of like traverse over, and that's at 11,000. And granted, I was 6 weeks post-op from an appendix removal. And at that time, now I'm like 20 weeks or 18 weeks pregnant. And so like a lot of things kind of fighting against me at that moment. And so as I'm climbing, I'm literally having to tell myself, go slower, Liz. Go slower. You can go slower than this. I need you to go slower than this. And I felt great. My breathing was underneath control. Yes, I still had to stop and put my foot down and recover still, because I would bump up every once in a while with a little steep bit. But having that slow pace helped with me gauging my heart rate, helped with me keeping it down to not go into that threshold level as much. And so then I was able to ride for longer periods of time versus having to do as many stops to let myself recover at that higher elevation. And so going as slow as physically possible. And we're going to be talking about some of that as I pop into our posture on the bike, because that plays a huge role into how we're able to go slow. Going slow as you're climbing is a skill. It's hard. It takes balance, takes body posture control. It takes a lot of things. It takes some power too. And so going slow is a skill, and it needs to be looked upon as that. It's not something that's always easy, because you'll think, I can't go any slower on that, I need speed. Well, probably you could go slower, but you might need to change how you move on the bike. You might need to change how you balance on the bike. You might need to change if your butt's still on the saddle or not. All of these aspects. And so the two main pacing things that I want you to remember: one, intervals. Don't stay in your threshold level for too long. Take a break, get some recovery, either with a foot down or going as slow as possible on some like little level out before it goes back up to steepy bits. Okay. 2, riding as slow as you possibly physically can. Okay. That's where you keep your heart rate down lower. You keep it in that zone like 3 range, or that sweet spot range, where you can stay there for longer periods of time. And it's not too taxing on your battery. You're not going to zap it all out at once. You're going to keep more of it, and you're going to be able to sustain for longer. And so as you start gaining more endurance, you're going to be staying in that sweet spot, that 3 to 4 range, just underneath the 4 range there, where you can go for longer periods of time. It helps so much for that. Let me see a couple comments. Diane says, I've heard a funny line that nobody should be trying to win at recovery. You know, as you start doing these intervals, your recovery rate will actually improve. And that's also what we're looking for, is that when you do take your breaks, when you do let your heart rate come back down, you'll recover quicker, especially if you have your other things in line, like your nutrition, your hydration, things like that. Candy says, congratulations. Thank you, Candy. And Christy says, love that you frame the stops as a positive. It is. It should be a positive. You have to flip that coin around, because it is beneficial to you. It's not something that I'm just like tooting your horn, like, no, be okay, get that mindset right. Like, no, like physiologically, how our body works, we should take breaks. Like, and wrapping your brain around that is it's so much easier. Like, I mean, I played collegiate D1 Division I soccer. I know to push myself, and I was pushing myself to the point that I was like having to lay on the side of the trail and put my feet up on a tree, because I was like, oh, I think I might pass out. Like, I know how to push myself, but it's not always beneficial in those regards. Kimberly asks, does this also help conditions as asthma? It will, because as your fitness level improves, handling some of that threshold recovery, then your ability to handle and your body's systems to be able to work together will get more efficient in it. Yes, you'll still have bad days where either there's more pollen, there's some other allergens are out there, it's cold. You'll have other things that come about with that'll throw you off. I have exercise-induced asthma. And so there's some days that are, whenever I was regaining a lot of fitness, that just sucked, to be honest. And understanding that was probably one of those days, and not being too hard on myself was key for it. The 3-hour climb, can you interval train that long? Yeah, totally. It's also where if it's a 3-hour climb, you're probably only going to have like punchy bits in certain sections. And so thinking about doing a slower pace for longer periods of time is going to be a better choice, and you'll take different sections of the trail, either like mile like 1.5 to 2.5, or 2.5 to 3.5. Those sections, you'll do more interval trainings in them. One of the climbs that is around here is a 4-mile climb, and I think it's like 2,500 feet of elevation. And so I take different pieces and parts of it and do different types of training in those. Now, do I call these training rides? No, I call it that I'm going out for a ride. And because I'm not going out there to win races. I'm not going out there to be so fast I want to beat everybody. I'm going out there to have fun. I've competed in so many things in my life that biking is not one of them right now for me. Not saying that might change later on, but right now it's to enjoy myself, to be in the woods and to get away from other things, and to know that I've had a good, like, my body knows that it did some work, and I feel good about that. Any questions on pacing for that I missed? If you have any questions that pop up later, we're going to be talking again later on about what all we can do in that question and answer section at the end. Let's talk a little bit about my body position. Sound good? So biggest things about body position, and I don't have my biking shoes on. I decided to just wear some Birkenstocks because my pedals. So body position on the bike is key. Why do we want good body position? One, to breathe. I need to be expanding my lungs and coming back. Our rib cage is super important for that. Also being able to breathe into our belly. It's harder for me right now. And being able to not stress our neck, because we have accessory breathing muscles that reside in our neck. As our chest comes up, that's these accessory breathing muscles here. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't like having a tight neck when I get to the top of that climb, or even after my ride. I just don't. And I would guess and bet money that y'all probably don't either. And so being able to expand our rib cage is pretty freaking important. And so body position, posture on the bike, we need that ability. We also, as we're climbing specifically, we need to keep traction on this guy, our back wheel, because as we move our pedal down, the key is that moves our back tire and propels us forward. Like, yeah, Liz, duh. Well, the key is that you have to be in the right gear for that to do the right stuff. If we're in too high of a gear or too easy of a gear to pedal, then we can potentially slip out, because then it's too much force going from our pedal to our tire all at once. If it's too hard of a gear, then I can't actually put my pedal down. I stall out, I get stuck, and then I fall over, or I put my foot down. One of the two. Let's hope that you put your foot down instead of falling over. And so traction for that is key. Where we have our weight on the bike helps us with keeping traction on the rear wheel. Different types of ground, there's many of y'all from all over the country, and so different types of ground will play a role into this. Is it sandy? Is it wet and slippery? Is it muddy? Is it like loamy where you can kind of stir up? Or is it like solid ground? Are there rocks? Are there wet roots? All of those things will play a role into what gear you need to be in so you don't slide out. One of the biggest things to think about is also where you want to have your weight. If I'm all the way here and I'm more on top of my front wheel, then I'm probably not putting as much load back here. But usually if I'm in this position here, our bike is tilted up, right? We're going uphill pretty good. And so we need, as we look at our, like, a plumb line, y'all know what a plumb line is? It's basically a line that goes down as gravity would lay from the center of your mass. And so as we look at a plumb line, it would probably pass through a little bit back to here, depending on how steep of a grade we're on. If we're on more flat ground, then we can be more like this. That's plenty of traction back here. The other thing that needs to be thought of is our front wheel. What does our front wheel do when we're climbing? Just want you to think about that for a second. Put it in the comments for me. I'm curious. What does our front wheel do when we're climbing? Why is it important? Why is our front wheel important? Curious. Steering. Yeah, steering. For sure. And so if we are pulling on our bars, are we going to be able to steer very well? No. No. If we're pushing and tugging on them in different ways, are we going to steer very well? No. And so as we think about our body position and posture, we need to be forward enough with our chest to keep us from pulling. And we also need to be strong where our power generation actually comes from. Where's our power generation come from to climb? Legs? Where's some other guesses? Where does it start? Yeah, we got a couple ladies, our core. It starts in our core. And then Adriana, it goes to our legs. But we can't have our legs working and functioning if we don't have our core. Otherwise, you know what we do? We pull on those bars to make our core kick and or to give ourselves a base. And so, yes, Alicia, that the more tired you are, the more wiggly your steering gets. Also, I had some lady talk in my Facebook group. I don't know if you are part of my Facebook group. There's 18,000 ladies in there. And she was asking about why she gets so much more tired on her mountain bike versus on a road bike versus doing other endurance sports. And it's because balance. When we mountain bike, we have to have a lot more balance because there's rocks, there's roots, there's steering that needs to happen. There's other things that are going on where we have to control our bike, where we have to balance that. Amanda, not my husband yelling at me from the back. Diane, yes, I'll share that information with you at the end. She asked about podcasts, other information. I'll give you the information about some of my free resources that I give out. So to go back to our positioning on here, front wheel, and this is to steer to make sure we know where we're going. And then we can go to the best path possible to help us gain and get up that climb. Rear wheel is traction, okay? And this is for climbing specific. For different other things that you're doing on the trail, cornering and other aspects, different scenario for some of these aspects. So don't overlay everything I tell you tonight for climbing to those things because it is different. So as I mentioned before, as y'all guessed, our core is super important. One, so we can maintain our body posture. So we can open up our chest and not like just dive down and curve over and lose our stability on the bike. So I want everybody right now, as you're sitting and watching this, slouch for me. Take a deep breath. Take another one, just because. Now I want you to sit nice and straight. Bring those shoulder blades down the back side of your rib cage. Open up your chest a little bit. Now take a deep breath. You can probably even hear it as I breathe. It's so much better. You get so much deeper of a breath through that. You fill up more of the bottom parts of your lungs. Your ribs are able to expand and like move as they should versus here they kind of are locked in. You can't get them moving as much. And so our core helps with our posture. And I'd say core, it's not just stomach. It's stomach and back and all of this stuff kind of put together, okay? Because our trunk is a cylinder and we should act like it's a cylinder. And so core is not just here. Yes, it's a main part of our core, but it's not just our stomach and our abs. It's kind of how it overlays around us and how we make ourselves a nice cylinder. The bottom is the pelvic floor. The top is the diaphragm for our bottom cylinder. Our top cylinder, bottom is the diaphragm, ribs and shoulder blade muscles and like accessory breathing muscles in our neck is the top. So we actually have 2 cylinders in our trunk. And so as we're tipped forward here, we want to make sure that we can have our chest open. Have you tried just balancing and making sure that you can take your weight off your hands a little bit? And this is like you're kind of coasting. And then have you tried tipping yourself forward and doing the same thing? This is where I say climbing slow is a skill, because you need core strength. You need to understand the balance posture on here as your butt is on the seat and as your butt is off of the seat. That's super critical. And so as I'm coming up and off the seat, I still need those same basic ideas, same basic functions. My core is my power generator. That's my stable base that my glutes, my quads, my hamstrings, my hip flexors, my calves are all pulling from and pushing from. And I'm not moving into my low back. I'm able to use these other muscle groups. Also, as I'm doing this, I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling, and I'm gaining that stability through here. So now that everybody's done one breathing exercise, let's do one other or just second breathing exercise for the day. I want you to pretend that you're breathing out through a straw. I want you to breathe out really forcefully, like you're blowing out birthday candles. Probably felt some core contraction there. That's one easy way of kicking in your core and then breathing afterwards. It helps you to engage these muscles. So then you can support as you use your glutes, as you use your hamstrings, as you use your quads, all of these things coming together to apply for you to keep traction back here, have the proper gear that you need, and the power to actually make it happen. As you climb slower, y'all, it's going to be harder in a power way because you have to maintain balance in that. You have to maintain your core strength in it. Yes, it's easier on your endurance, on your lungs, but it's going to make some of these other muscles work differently. It's going to make you be able to do the good old scoop and pull through versus just pressing your leg down straight, because you have more ability to use some other different muscle groups that you wouldn't have been able to use if you didn't have your core on. Climbing slow is a skill, but it's one that you can really, really work on. Also, one time, it was after my appendectomy, there's this one section of trail around here. If you're from the area, it's the top of where Spencer and Trace meet to the top of Trace. It's a fairly brutal climb. The last little bit punchy. There's some bigger rocks that are around, some different moves. Well, I cleaned it my first time back out there after my appendectomy. It was a couple weeks after. I think it was 3.5 weeks out there. 3.5 weeks after my appendectomy that I went back out there. And there was a guy that was riding behind me, and he goes to my other friend, because I don't know how Liz maintained her balance and pedaled up that so slow. And she made it. And I made it because, and my fitness level was obviously not where it needed to be. It was because I was used to doing things slow. I was used to doing things at a snail's pace. And I could achieve and do more things in the trail, even as I was getting back out there, because of that skill that I had gained. That's key within all of this, is that understanding how going slow is actually a skill. Understanding how going slow works more of your muscle groups, which is good for us, and doesn't tax as much your cardiac system, especially if you've been out of it and haven't been able to do it. Does this this kind of correlating, everybody? How our core strength plays a huge like benefit to being able to utilize our legs, being able to utilize our glutes more, and also helping to support our upper trunk, upper cylinder, so we can breathe. It's huge. It also supports our neck, our shoulders, like it just makes us be able to move more efficiently, you know? And that's key also. The more that we want our battery to last, we need to move more efficiently through it. I don't want to just be taxing one muscle group. Don't just want to be using my quads. I want to be using my quads, my glutes, my core, my hamstrings, all of them put together for it. Alicia says, is a weak core the cause of a sore low back after some long rides or something else? Typically it is. It's why I've made an entire program called the Core Crushers distinctly for helping with core strength, and why in my other like main programs, that core is involved if you do upper body, core is involved if you do lower body, and core is involved if you do my core exercises. It's a main key component, especially for us women, because we're a little wider typically. And we need more core strength because we're a little wider. Like my husband is 6 foot and some change, 6'1", and I'm 5'4". I wear size 34 men's pants, and that's the same size that he does. He's so much like, there's so much more to him than me, and I have the same width in my hips. And actually, I think my hips are a little bit bigger than his because I can't fit in his whitewater kayak, because I'm like, oh my gosh, do you actually have any hips, dude? So I have to take some of his hip shims out. They're like foam pads inside of his kayak, so I can actually like wiggle my butt into his kayak sometimes. And so we have to have a stronger core because we're a little wider typically. That's where we usually, as we talk about women and female athletes, usually we're more knee centric. We usually use more of our quads. As we're going to jump off something, it's also why we have more ACL injuries, is that when we jump off something, we usually bend at our knees and not so much at our hips. You watch the same guy, similar age group, he's going to bend more at his hips and his knees put together because they have more hip control from having a little bit more narrow of a frame, or a little bit more like more core as a whole. You know, we also go through typically these like lovely monthly cycles that make our stomach hurt. And if we're bloated, if we have GI distress, if we have other things going on, do we want to actually use our abs? No. I don't want any more pressure down there. You kidding me? Hell no. And so we don't. And so it's important that we understand how to turn on these other muscles, that we understand how to support ourselves, that we understand how it affects us, how we ride. Because it makes such a huge difference in it, and our balance and our ability to keep traction on the rear wheel, and our ability to maintain our steering and our where we want to go with our 2 front handlebars, our 2 hands on our handlebars. Oh my gosh. And so it's so important for that. Julia says, does using our abs actually ever get easier? Is it something that we will always have to be working on? You know, it does. There's always the next step that you can go on through anything in fitness, always. But it does get easier, that it will kick on more subconsciously. You're going to have to kick it on a little bit more consciously at first. Not like a brace. I don't want you to act like tighten everything down like there's something stuck up your butt. Like, no. But it does need to be working for you. It does need to be on enough for the demand that you're putting on it. You know, if I'm going to go in the other room, I'm going to lift a refrigerator. Like, I want a solid contraction of my core. I'm going to probably brace it. If I'm going to go in the other room, I'm going to pick up a pencil. Don't need to have the same type of core activation. Same thing goes if I'm going to do more of a power move. There's a lady that talked about getting up and over trees, over roots, like bigger logs. I need more core. I need more kick to be able to do that front wheel lift and to be able to change how I'm moving on the bike to make it happen. If I'm just doing a slower, easier climb, don't need as much, but I do need some. And so understanding that there's a gradient level within it. It's not just like 110% brace all the time. No, that's not efficient either. Like you got to go back and forth on that. Has this been helpful, y'all? Has this been eye-opening for some different aspects of positioning on the bike, how you're pacing, how you're able to move on the bike? Awesome. I'm stoked. Who's going to go out and they're going to change how they're riding the next time they go out and ride? I want to know, like, yes, I'm going to change. Yes, tomorrow. Awesome. Like, that's the key thing, is that a lot of this stuff, you can change it the next time you go out. Yes, is a mindset shift. Yes, it's like you're working on some skills and that. And you may need some other strength aspects within it. And that's like, seek help when you need it. Either a personal trainer and a PT that's around you, some of my programs, like there's so many different avenues for this. Just make sure you're seeking the right avenue for you. That's the key part. And then working on your balance, working on it. Elizabeth says, "I'll try my best." You got it, girl. All right. Anybody have questions for me as we kind of wrap up the main meat and potatoes of the talk for it? How do you work on your balance? Ooh, I love this one. So one is, so there's some on the bike stuff and there's some off the bike stuff. I like both because I do a lot of off the bike stuff to help me for on the bike, because I didn't always have as much time to go ride as much as I wanted to. And that would affect my riding, right? I mean, I used to work, before I started more of my online stuff, I used to work like 45, 50 hours in the PT clinic working for somebody else. And I was behind on pretty much every fitness thing that you could possibly be behind on because I just didn't have time. And I thought that. And so I started 15-minute groupings of stuff. And that helped me tremendously with my biking. It's actually where my program stemmed from, was the fact that I needed to help myself. And then I applied it to other people for it. So off the bike stuff, I work on my hip hinge and I do different balance aspects for that. So I maintain that stability and control, and I do different leg exercises. I put my foot down and do body twists for the top part. I just did what was called a body to bike challenge in the Ride Life team, which is my like monthly training team. And it all went from like how to work on balance control for your body. One of them was actually going out and slow climbing. And so slow climbing in technical sections is something I really like to do to help me with my balance. And I see how slow, excuse me, I had a little hiccup. I see how slow I can go in like a super technical area and maintain my traction, maintain my balance, and still get through it. Do I session that? Hell yeah. I don't just ride it once. I go back, ride it again, I go back, ride it again, I go back and ride it again. If you're hanging out with a bunch of other people there on the trail, everybody gets something from it. Super wonderful for that. So those are just two instances of how I work on my balance. I also do track stands. I do track stands in my warm up in the parking lot. I do track stands when I'm waiting for different things on the bike. I do different smaller circles. It's just, I call it play on the bike. Another thing in my background or my history is I competed in freestyle whitewater kayaking. And so did flips in my kayak and like twisty flips, spins, and like end-to-end stuff on my kayak. And so doing tricks or play on my bike, in my kayak, that's just a little bit more of my nature versus trying to go out and just ride as hard and fast as I possibly can. I'd much rather be skilled in something and have fun with reading the trail and going down through it and seeing like what I can like bounce off of, what I can go over, what I can offload onto, and all of those aspects, and like what I can challenge myself with when in certain climbing, that stuff's play to me. And it may not be to everybody. I totally understand that. Just as riding for hours upon end on my trainer maybe play to some other people, and it's not me particularly. Yes, I have a trainer. Yes, I ride it. But I'd much rather go play on my mountain bike outside. This is coming from your strength and endurance coach. So those are ways that I work on balance. I hope that was helpful. For pacing, if you need to stop and put a foot down, is it better to get off and walk your bike for a bit to keep moving the active recovery? Yes and no. One, yes, like, yeah, it helps you keep your heart rate going if you can relax it. A lot of times, if you're stopping in the middle of a climb, you're going to boost it back up pretty quickly, even just walking your bike up the trail. That's where it's no. And so make sure that you're actually getting a recovery versus just trying to keep moving for it. Elaine says, help with technical climbing over roots and rocks. How to best gain strength power to get over these without increasing heart rate and using all your juice. That is where your core strength and understanding your glute strength play a huge role together. Reverse lunges are one of my favorite exercises. And I do reverse lunges a little bit differently because as female athletes, we, as I mentioned earlier, we're more quad dominant. And lunges are a little bit more quad dominant. So what do we do to make them a little bit more glute dominant is that we add a hip hinge in. And so as we're doing our thing, let me tilt that bad boy down. Take off my Birkenstocks. I'm not going to be on the bike anymore. So as we're going down into our reverse lunge, I'm hip hinged forward, not falling over forward. But usually in lunges, they want you to keep an upright trunk for you here. Well, I want you to hip hinge. And so you're driving that hip up and forward and letting it come back. And so now it's not just a knee movement, it's a hip movement, and your core has to work, and you're understanding your hip hinge even a little bit better. That's where I say, like, making sure that your program that you're going to be doing incorporates more things that are more one-sided. That's also more the strength and power of that. We don't need as much two-sided stuff. Yes, it's important. Yes, I have that in my programs. But I have, as soon as you possibly can, more one-sided stuff. Because I don't know about you, but you're not biking with both feet at the same time. It's also less functional whenever we go 2 feet down. It's much better if we do one leg is supporting and having to stabilize. You're using your core a little bit more, and you're using your glute, both glute max and glute med. Your glute med is a smaller muscle, like the side of your butt here, not on the side of your butt. And glute max is like the main center one. Your glute med is what works more when you stand on one leg. Sorry. I get more hiccups now that I've been pregnant. It's absurd. And so as you're working on your strength of that leg, you're working on that power kick to raise up and get over some of those technical climbing bits. Having a strong, not only glute max, but glute med in association with your core are key parts. Also, one thing is using some different body movements on the bike to pop the front wheel up a little bit more, and practicing just like that front wheel lift, just as you're on flat ground, is really, really good for it, and track stands. Because if you can stop and go and stop and go and stop, then you're going to be much more able to do that when you're on the trail and you're facing obstacles in front of you that make you stop. it's another part within that. That's that balance part. Christy, when climbing, my tire spins. Does that mean I don't have enough weight on my back tire? Feel like I'm sitting with my weight down. Gravel might be play a part. So that's where, as we think about like our gears, one, it could be that you need a little bit more weight back there, potentially. But if you're sitting on the saddle, it's that forward or back part of your trunk, whether you're sitting up enough. Sometimes your front wheel can pop up if you're sitting too upright, or you'll pull in your bars a little bit more. But think about more of your gearing. It's probably that you need a little bit harder of a gear. And so as I'm going down, if I push my pedal down that far, and it's easy to put that pedal down that far, then my rear tire, I'm pointing to it because I can see myself in the reflection, it will spin faster in that moment. If it's a harder gear, then I'll push down just a little bit, and that'll be the same amount that my tire will move. And so I won't be able to make my rear tire spin as quickly if I'm in a harder gear to move. And that's where, if you find yourself spinning out on certain sections, make it harder for you to pedal. And that'll typically help you with your spin out of your rear tire. Unless you come up and off the saddle, and that's a little bit different story. You may need to make sure you're in more of a hip hinged position versus in a squatted position, aka hip hinge position versus squatted position. Because if you're in the squatted position and you're up and out of the saddle, I'm not keeping weight on my rear tire. Here I am. And that's very big difference between the two. Sweet.
Hey, Liz. We do have a question in the Q&A box. I don't know if you can pull that up on your end, or I'll read it for you.
Yeah, if you want to read it for me.
When pedaling uphill, I sometimes get a sharp twinge in my knee, like it feels like something is pinching in it. It usually goes away after a bit of pedaling. Is there a faster way to correct our knees for going up?
So one thing, kind of a twofold answer with that. One, if you think that there's something wrong with your knee that you might need to go get checked out, then I would suggest it, because you may need some PT to specifically target some areas that might need some help for that. Another thing is that sometimes we tend to draw our knees in towards the frame of the bike to gain our power at first, and our knees never like to go in. They're a hinge. They don't like to get kinked and then try to move. And so as we're drawing our knees inward, they can sometimes get kinked. And sometimes as we move, we tend to get our body warmed up a little bit more. So we tend to use our glutes a little bit better then. Our glutes are what keep our knees out. And our adductors, or our like groin muscles through here, or even just using just our quads, make that knee go in versus out. And you can kind of tell as I'm going in, like it doesn't really want to go in as much, but man, I can sure go out and it feels good there. But that doesn't really feel too hot to go in, and it can put some stress on some of our internal mechanisms of our knee. And so making sure that your glutes are strong enough, keeping your knees away from your frame are two things that are pretty important for that. Yep. Keeping those knees out a little bit more so.
And Liz, I have a second question in the Q&A box. I was once told it's bad to spend a lot of time in zone 3, although I feel like I often find myself there a lot of the time. Thoughts on this? Should I try to alternate between zones 2 to 4 instead?
So the reason why they say that not to spend time in zone 3 is because it doesn't give you as much bang for your buck. They sometimes call them trash miles, but it's that it doesn't give you quite as much bang if you're like doing specific training stuff. It's not going to be counter counter efficient for you. It's not going to be detrimental to you. It's just not going to give you as much like oomph for you. I would go a little bit higher if you're like looking to train and go into that like sweet spot zone just below where you're in that threshold and stay there instead for periods of time like 8 to 10 to 15 to 25 minutes per se, and then recover in between those if you're like for training intervals specifically. And then if you're wanting to do base miles, then that's whenever you do like your long hour and a half, 2 hours, 3-hour rides in that like super easy zone. That's kind of like your recovery or your base miles ride. Zone 3 miles are not going to hurt you. They're just not as much oomph, much bang for your buck for it. So it's not bad. It's just not as beneficial. And so that's what they say, like they're trash miles for people that are putting in a ton of training. Because a lot of whenever you're looking at anything online for what's being done, if I look at the pro mountain bikers, what are they doing for training? What are they doing for lifting? What are they doing for fitness? And I try to mimic exactly that. One, I'm never going to be able to actually make it happen because that's not my job. I'm not a pro mountain biker. I'm not like, yes, I run a lot of things in mountain biking and that is kind of my job, but I'm not like specialized. I'm a specialized ambassador, but I'm not like pro. I'm not racing. That's not my main job. And so I'm never going to be able to match what I'm doing. It's like trying to look at another way of looking at that is business wise. If I had my small startup company and I'm looking at these multi-billion-dollar companies, am I going to do exactly what they're doing? No, I'm not, because I'm not there yet. And so you need to look at something that's just above you or look at different ways of training and apply it to where you are. And so as they're looking at zone 3 is trash miles or miles that are not as beneficial, it's because they're doing so much more extra. They have a higher training volume. They need to like focus on recovery. They need to think about how much time they're in the saddle. They need to think about their recovery within that and how much stress they're putting in what parts of the ride they are like doing intervals in. And so that's where that kind of plays a role into how things move. Any other questions in that Q&A?
No, our Q&A has been I think there's just a couple in the chat box that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll look at the chat box. Diane says, I rarely come out of the saddle when climbing. What do you recommend? I recommend you stay in the saddle as much as you can. You come out of the saddle to help the bike move underneath of you a little bit better. And so if it's going to go up and over a rocky bit, then you getting your butt out of the way and not having to lift you as well as the rest of the bike up and over that rocky bit whenever it's coming to the rear tire is better. Get your butt out of the way. Otherwise, stay in the saddle, keep your weight down and move. It's not as beneficial unless you have those different parts that the bike is going to be transitioning and traversing across. And so that's where that like little hover or even getting out of the saddle if you need to use different muscles, that's where that comes into play. Kimberly, if you have a fairly steady climb, should you incorporate intervals with speed or gearing? I think it depends on how steep the steady climb is. We have a pretty steady climb on one section of trail, and it's going to get you up into that zone 4, that threshold. And that's whenever you would incorporate the intervals and you take a break. If it's not quite as steep, then I would try to go slower and just snail's pace up and cruise up that steady grade, and making sure you're thinking about your core, make sure you're light on your hands and you're able to steer, those other different aspects. Kimberly says your program cover endurance, base miles, intervals. It gives a a grounding of that, and I give some different examples of intervals. And I also have an understanding interval module within that to help you use your intervals on the trail is where I have with that. It's a lot of it is strength based, because that's where a lot of women lack, is that strength component. Sweet. Hey Jody, yep, it's going to be recorded. You'll get it emailed to you as well. I think all participants will get this emailed as a replay. Yep. Right?
Yes.
Sweet.
Yay.
Sweet. Any other questions, y'all? Awesome. I hope this has been super helpful for y'all, and that it will change the way you're thinking about your riding. It will change the way that you're thinking about your pacing, how your position on the bike is. Yep. Becky, I have a little thing that on my YouTube channel, it's like a cool down thing that my friend Anna and I did together. It's on the Ride Life, or Liz's Ride Life YouTube channel. And it's, I think it's post-ride stretches or something like that. It's all ones that you can do in the parking lot. And we made it all ones that you didn't have to do on the ground, because let's be honest, I'm not gonna lay on the ground in the parking lot. And I don't expect y'all to either. And so we had some stretches that were there to follow through with. I'm glad this is going to be helpful for so many of y'all. And we got one more. What are your thoughts on seat height in regards to utilizing muscles outside of the glutes better? I think it's, as long as you don't feel stressed in your knees, go low or go high, it's a little bit of a personal preference. For some of it, you're gonna make sure that you're not using too much of your calves at the bottom range, so your toes aren't pointed, or you're not like shifting on your saddle as you're trying to reach the bottom part of the pedal stroke. That's kind of the biggest component of it. And so there's not really a 15 degrees of knee flexion. It feels cozy for you. It's a little bit of personal preference for that. Awesome, y'all. Have a fantastic, Kimberly, warm-up suggestions. There's also on my YouTube channel a warm-up routine. It's really simple. It's like 5 different exercises. You may look a little funny as you're warming up your neck, because I have you doing this, but it's still good.
Liz, do you want us to send your YouTube link on this chat, or do you want to just include that on the email? We have what's your YouTube again?
Oh, let's do this, Camilla. In the email, I'll just give you a link to my podcast, my website, YouTube, and my email, in case anybody has any questions.
All right. Does that sound good to everybody? That's
and we'll
awesome.
it'll just go out on that. If you want to look it up, Liz's Ride Life is the YouTube channel. I'm just now starting to put a lot of my Facebook lives into it, and so don't expect it to be beautiful and glorious just yet, but it's building.